Welcome to the Home Building Hub, your essential podcast guide to building your new home. Hosted by industry experts Colin Bischoff and Darren Brennan, this conversational podcast will help better educate you about all things new home building so you can avoid costly mistakes and enjoy your building experience to the fullest, no matter which home builder you choose.
Hey there, folks. Welcome to the Home Building Hub. You're with Colin, co-host with Darren Brennan, as always. And welcome to a new episode. Today we're going to talk about something that I think, Darren, a lot of people don't quite understand and hear a bit of, a few war stories over the journey. Today we're going to be covering a bit of an insight and a few tips and just a bit of education about fencing and half-share fencing at that, Darren, because it's just something that we think will help you as a home buyer, something to prepare for down the track. So how you going, mate? Hopefully you can hear me okay this week. We've been struggling a bit with the internet, haven't we?
Yeah, mate, absolutely. It's coming through loud and clear, which is great. And Colin's jumped onto the Starlink, so sounds pretty flash, mate, and it's certainly working well, which is good. So, mate, the fencing topic is a great topic, and it's not something, to be fair, that I've had a huge amount to deal with. Yes, I'll bucket loads of houses. I've been involved in lots of houses, but over the journey, most of the builders I've worked for don't supply fences, so it's back on the consumer, and then they're out there struggling their way through that. Whereas I know for yourself, you've had some experience in that, and in fact, you've moved into your new place. I'm sure you're going through those same things right now. So I think it's really relevant, and I think it'll help people out.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. So I can share a little bit about that. I guess before we do, for those who are listening for the first time or watching for the first time, if you want to learn more about myself or Darren and why we're doing this podcast, just jump back to episode number 1. It's an introduction. It tells you everything you need to know. It's really short and sharp. Is there any fee, Darren, for this podcast?
Mate, it is free of charge, but the fee isn't monetary. It's we'd really love for you to share the podcast with just at least one friend if you're getting value out of it. So just send them a link and let them have a listen. And we're really wrapped. The listeners numbers are going up every week, which is fantastic, and we really appreciate the support. So thanks for listening in, and hopefully you're getting value out of the podcast.
Yeah, awesome. Well, as you sort of hinted at, so most builders don't do fencing as part of the quote and the inclusion level. However, there are some companies that offer, which we've mentioned before, full turnkey inclusions. So in our case, we'll just use our example. So Metricon generally don't offer fencing, whereas the company I work for, and that's very common, I would just say display home builders for the most part don't offer fencing, clothesline, letterbox, those turnkey items to finish things off, or landscaping in a lot of ways. But there are some of us out there that do offer those things, and we, I guess, do that because it makes life a bit easier for investor clients, for first home buyers who just want it all said and done. Now, one of those things as part of turnkey inclusions is fencing. And essentially, we're talking about when you're building next to a neighbour. In that event, fencing means that you will need to pay a half share, which we'll explain in a little bit more detail, what that means. And I guess what we need to help you understand in this episode is really the process that you go through. And like you said, Darren, yes, I've moved into a new home recently, still getting things set up, like trying to understand fencing is one of the parts of the process. So we got ours installed. We already had 2 boundaries up. We got ours installed literally a week and a half ago on the last boundary, and we have gone through the process we're about to share with you. So maybe, Darren, what's the bottom line?
I guess the bottom line is, the fence, if you're sharing it with a neighbour, it's exactly that. It's shared, so the cost is shared. So you need to make sure that you're understanding that, and you go through that process. You need to agree on a price that you're happy with. So you go and get some quotes, and you've got to agree on a price. Obviously, what you want is the fencing company then to share those quotes, so you don't have to go and chase your neighbour. They chase the neighbour, and ultimately that's sort of where you get to. If you've moved in and your neighbour hasn't, and you don't have a neighbour yet, the block next door may not have sold. You may need to pay for the whole fence and then be reimbursed by your neighbour. Common law says they've got an obligation to reimburse you. So, that's just the way it is, right? Um, I think it also comes into some tricky lines, Colin. Now, in most of the newer states, they say, great, where I live, I've got colour bond fencing, so metal fencing, but you might have timber fencing. But you might be in an established area where you're happy with just a timber fence. It's generally the most cost effective. Um, However, your neighbour wants to put up a full brick fence. They want like to build a castle, right? And maybe they'll put a moat around it as well or something. But they may choose they want to put up a brick fence. Well, if that's what the choice that they want to make, you don't have the same obligation, right? Now you may say, you know what, it's my neighbour and a brick fence might be cool. Great, let's go down that process, but it's damn expensive. Or you might say, you know what? No, I'm just happy with the standard fence, a timber fence. I'm only going to pay for my half share up to that amount. I've got 3 quotes. I'm happy with the middle one. I'll pay that half share. You can put the brick one up and pay for that. I'm not going to stop you doing it, but I'm not paying 40 grand for a side fence. So it's those juggles, and it's just trying to do that, go through that process and make sure you remain happy with your neighbour. The last thing you want to do is, get to a point that you're throwing rocks or bricks over the fence at each other, and it becomes a bit of a war. You want to have a nice neighbourly relationship, I guess. So, yeah. So hopefully that gives you an overview.
Yeah, it does. So I guess for splitting that up a little bit, the full turnkey companies, those that provide fencing, generally what they will do is they will outsource the fencing to a fencing company, and that fencing company will make a few attempts to reach out to your neighbour, essentially to say, "Hey guys, we're going to build the fence for lot one. You guys are lot two," and then they'll do it for the three boundaries if that's the case. And in the event that that neighbour does not respond, then yeah, like you said, Darren, then you generally the client in our case, in any case, will have to pay the full share and then knock on the door when they move in next door, or whenever they sort of have someone who's bought that block, or whenever the time's right. Now, I think one of the most important things to understand is the basic process. So if you're buying from a builder that doesn't do fencing, or you're buying from a company like ours that does, the process is pretty similar. So number one, you've got to get your your neighbour's details. Now, there's actually through your council, you will be able to register your details, and as a result, request for your neighbour's information. Generally, they won't share anything more than the name and the address, their current address of the neighbour. And then you will send them a letter that basically says, "Hi guys, John Smith here. I'm looking to build a fence in between our boundaries." You might have to send 3 letters, and then based on 3 boundaries, then what you do is you if you can, go and get 3 quotes and just put those quotes in the letter, and hopefully once they do get their mail, they can give you a call. And then it's easy to talk through rather than waiting, 3 or 4 days for a letter to come back. And, we talk over an email or over text, or over a phone call. Much quicker, much easier. They may choose to get their own quotes, that's fine. But essentially, you got to get some quotes and land on one that you're all happy with, and then you can push ahead and proceed with fencing. The one thing, I mean, in a perfect world, you're both building at the same time and you both want a fence at the same time, but that very rarely happens. Usually someone's going to build first, and like in my case here, next door is vacant. I wanted a fence up for security purposes. We put a fence up, we paid the full share, and I've just sent the letter off to the client just last week. So, or actually earlier this week. So I shouldn't say client. I keep saying client. I mean neighbour. So then I expect them to read that letter and give me a call and say, "Yep, no worries, thank you. We'll pay you the half share," and off we go. Okay, so that's generally the process if it works that way. So anything else to add there, Daz, or do you want to move into, I guess, how to know? Oh, you got something?
I
Yep.
was going to say one that does come up a bit, Cole, is and it's a great example. So you've moved in and you've got your fences up, and particularly if it's a vacant block next door, the neighbour comes along and they want to build their garage right on the boundary. We're not talking 200 millimeters off the boundary. They want to build it zero on the boundary. And obviously that creates a challenge because you've got a fence right along that spot. And so, you've got to now have that bit of fence removed, and somehow you've got to still secure your backyard. So you might have a dog, and now you're trying to secure this backyard while they build. They're also not officially allowed on your block unless you give them permission. So the bricklayer's got to try and not go on your block, but it's inevitable that, some mortar from the bricks is going to fall there. And it's just, it does get a little bit messy and people get a bit upset by that process. And I guess it's just, be understanding. They have the right to build right on the boundary. That is their right. From an upshot, you don't have this pokey little gap, 200 mil between the house and the fence. So I've lived right now, mine's 3 meters off on one side and 2 meters off on the other. So I'm on quite a big block. So I've got plenty of room. But I've also lived when it's been right on the fence, and that's been good, and there's no little pokey gap. But I've also lived when it's 200 mils off, and what do you do with this crappy little gap? So I fenced the front of it near the garage front, and at the back I put a tiny little gate in, and I was able to use it for a bit of storage for ladders and stuff. But otherwise, it's just collects garbage and stuff down there. Stuff blows in down there, and you can't get to it, and it's just yeah, so I would prefer on the boundary if I was going to be in that spot. But yeah, it's certainly another
It's a
one of
good
those
point.
challenges with fences.
It's a good point, and actually, it's literally what we're going through here. So the neighbour is starting to build next door. The
Yeah,
day we put the fence up, they put their temp fence up.
right.
So it all happened on the same day, and we finished our fence, and they came in and did the site cut literally the next day when the fence was still the palings were being done. So the fencing took 2 days, right? So one was the frame of the fence. Day two, he came back to do the palings, the actual timber palings, and the capping and all that stuff. On that day, the site cut people with the big excavators and whatever came in and cut the block. And what they did is the garage is on our fence side. So they got the big machine, they cut right down next to the fence where this guy had just poured concrete the day before to put in the timber posts. So what that means is I have to now be patient in terms of my landscaping. There's no point me putting crushed rock or something down the side of the house now, because the reality is if we put too much weight up against my fence there, it's just going to blow it out and fall onto the neighbour's block. So what I need to do is exactly to your example, is wait to determine when the electricity box goes up. You should be able to have a look at the plans, or at the very least wait for the slab to go down and see whether they're going to be building on the boundary or whether they're going to have that 200 mil gap. If they're building on boundary, I know I'm going to have a brick wall as a boundary or as a fence, which means they're going to rip some of the fence down. So in that event, I'm still going to ask the clients to pay for the full fence because I've just done it and it's installed. But in their case, essentially, the builder's probably going to rip down, 6 or so meters of it because that might be a brick wall. So, it's site by site and things happen. So you do have to have some patience and understanding. It's not the client's fault next door. It's just my timing was different to theirs, and it is what it is. So you don't want to be starting your neighborly relationship in a bit of a negative sort of manner. Okay, there's always a way to get through it. There's no way I'd not allow the brickies to come on here and say, come along, and do this properly. And I'd just go and buy a slab and say, this is yours if you actually make sure this is kept pretty clean.
And there's a
Simple.
second one if you brick up my letterbox for me.
Yeah, yeah. Like it's not that hard. You just need to be patient, understanding, respectful, and it will generally work out. Okay. So,
So I guess
all right.
another part in that whole fencing journey, Colin, is what type of fence to install. So we gave sort of three examples so far, which was Colorbond, metal, um, timber, and again, depending, it could be capped, not capped. That just means a little bit of extra detail on the top. It could be a brick fence, unlikely as a fence between properties, but it could be. So how do you work out what sort of fence it is? And what you would do is reference back. If you're in a land estate, the design guidelines will usually specify the type of fence. If you're not in a land estate, reality is I've got Colorbond, and it's a great example here. I've got I'm trying to think, Monument Colorbond fence here, Monument Colorbond fence on my other boundary, but at the back, I don't know who thought it was a good idea, but they put a cream Colorbond fence. So you don't really notice it, but you do. Like I know it's cream. I don't walk out the back and go, what happened? But I know it's a cream colour bond fence and it should have been monument. Like, it would have just made sense, but
Yeah.
it's not. So I would have if I had a preference, I'd prefer it to be colour bond. But it was here when I bought the property, so we've left it that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, those sort of things can happen. So and you don't want that. You want it to look uniform and look good, and away you go. And even the difference between, you may find that you have to put up the third fence, right? So in your case, you already had two up. You go to put the third one. If it's in timber, you don't want it to look different, because there are different profiles that they'll cut the top of the post on or whatever. You want them to all look the same. So, if you can, get them all done at once, and it'll be a
Yeah.
better situation. Not always the case, but yeah, that's pretty much
Yeah.
that. And I guess you know, don't forget when you get your fences is to also remember you probably need little side fences. So a little fence between the house and the fence, and you might want a gate in there. And again, that little bit between, if you are 200 mil off with your garage off the boundary, you might want them to fill in that little gap too, just so it finishes it off really well. So yeah, that's probably some advice on how to work out what to put up.
Yeah. So most common, Darren, we come across, because we do the fencing stuff all the time, is the these days is not a standard timber paling fence. It's actually a timber paling fence with exposed posts and capped. So that means there's a nice flat piece across the top as well, perfect for a cat to sit on, so to speak. And that generally is what most estates require. Some are colour bond. So one thing I guess we wanted to share to finish this up was corner lots. Okay, so some estates will require, depending on the location, like if you're in an estate that faces a reserve or a park, sometimes an estate may say that must be a double story, or they have special requirements for special lots, right? In the case of corner lots in some estates, they actually require you to upgrade the corner side only, exponentially. Like sometimes they got you know, extra posts and gaps in between them, or they got these crazy upgrades to make the fence look really nice, and therefore the street appeal look really nice as well. So just factor that in mind. If you're going to buy a corner lot, a couple of things to consider. Do I need more upgraded fencing than just what everyone else is doing in between their lots? And probably the other one is that you have to pay full share for that corner fence, because you're not going to have a neighbour. The neighbour is going to be the street. Okay, so you buy a corner lot, you got to factor in there's going to be a little bit more dollars, a few grand, potentially, to cover full share fencing. So just sort of give that little tip at the end there, Darren, so that can help people out. Yeah.
You've just done your fences, Cole. Rough idea. What are you thinking price wise?
Yeah, good question. They seem to go up a fair bit lately, I think, in general. But I would say if you're going to do half share fencing, you should be expecting to be paying between maybe four, 5, 6 grand tops. Probably six is getting heavy, but yeah, somewhere, yeah, at least 3 grand, I would say. It's somewhere in between 3 and 6. It's a bit more these days, Daz. So um,
It's been a while
go.
since I sat in a garage selling houses and sort of giving people that advice. So, like we used to always say 2.5. I mean, it's a long time, like I say, since I've sat in a garage. So, yeah, even if it's 4, it's jumped a fair bit, and that's for a half share. But, you can end up with a nice
Yeah.
fence and you need it. So just move on, smile a lot.
Yeah, so the 6 is more going to be the full share. So yeah, you could sort of say around the 3 mark should be half share for a normal block, 28 deep, or
Yep.
something like that. Yep.
Yeah,
But
cool.
it does vary. I mean, I got quotes that were 7 grand just to do one side. It's like, so we went with one that was about four or so. The company that we actually use, our builders use. So it's a fair bit cheaper. Yep.
Yeah, good.
So good.
No, great.
Well, hopefully that's sort of not just nudging on 19 minutes there, Darren. So hopefully, guys, it gives you good tips, a little bit of a basic understanding of the process around fencing, and something that you're all going to have to factor in and understand. Maybe not when you're thinking about it. What house do I fit? What does my kitchen look like? It's not something that's at the forefront of everyone's mind, but it is something you have to factor in, along with landscaping and those sorts of things. So hopefully it's helped. And yeah, if you like what you listen to, like what watching, please jump on, guys. Give us a 5-star review on whatever platform you're on. We would greatly appreciate that. If you've got any questions, any, ideas for topics, send through something on the Contact Us form. That's at homebuildinghub.com.au. And other than that, we will see you guys on the next one.
Absolutely. All the best.
See you guys.
Thanks for listening to the podcast, guys. And just our disclaimer, whilst we're all about providing value to you, this podcast should not be considered as legal or financial advice. It contains general information only, and you should seek out independent professional advice on your personal situation before making any legal or financial decisions.
1,